There appeared to be only one inlet to the cave, and that was so narrow that the boys must need to climb along single file on hands and knees through the wet of the stream. It was hard going, at a slight incline upward, and it seemed endless, but it was fairly straight and had no branches or side caves to confuse them. "If it goes on up," panted Hugh, close at Dickon's heels, "it ought to come out above ground sometime, or somewhere." "Well, here's your somewhere," said Dickon, pushing his candle and then himself with a mighty wiggle through a particularly cramped spot. "But it certainly isn't above ground." He stood up straight and shook himself. In a moment Hugh was beside him. They found themselves in another cave, larger than the first. The stream still lay at their feet in a shallow depression of the floor, and it was flowing from a low, broken circular stone wall which was built out from the side of the cave not far from where they stood. In silent amazement they approached it. "Why, it's a well," said Hugh, "an old, old well. Somebody made it by digging down and then damming up the stream, and then the water must have got away through this break in the wall whenever there was an overflow and gone on carving that passage through the earth down the way we came in. But why a well here?" "And how did folk ever get to it?" added Dickon. This cave was not only larger in size than the other, it also gave evidence of having been fashioned by the hand of man as well as by the action of water. Slowly the two boys inspected the four walls of it. 3 of them were lined with large irregular slabs of stone very much like the walls of the treasure chamber. The 4th, behind the semicircular well, was of natural cave bed material. It was uneven and sloped back, and when Dickon held his candle high, the light did not penetrate far enough to see where the roof closed in to meet it. "Maybe this is where the cave opens up entirely, and if we climb up here, we'd come to daylight," suggested Dickon. "You can't see any daylight, can you?" said Hugh, peering up. "No, but there's a draught of wind and bats. They must come in from here." Several of the eerie little creatures darted close to them, fascinated by the candlelight, and then swooped about the cave, gibbering and confused. "Look here," continued Hugh. "The stream that feeds this well comes in from this direction. Let's follow it as far as we can." The water ran, a thin trickle, scarcely more, from a break in the wall behind the well on the opposite side from where it ran. Once again the boys followed the line of water, climbing up a steeper grade this time, through a rounded aperture, and then a passageway that was so relatively even and smooth that it quickly became evident to them just what it was. "This is no natural watercourse," said Dickon to Hugh's heels, for Hugh and the candle had gone first this time. "This is a drain, man-made." "Must be," said the other shortly. He was getting very tired, and though he would not have admitted it to anybody, least of all Dickon, this climbing down walls and through caves and jagged underground water-courses was much more difficult for him. He was secretly glad this course was smoother. After they had scrambled on in silence for a while, Hugh exclaimed in delight, and put out his candle. A square of grey daylight pierced the darkness through which they were progressing, and the sight lent speed to the aching bodies of both of them. "We'll be on top of the earth again instead of under it in a minute now," cried Dickon. "Where do you suppose we will come out?" Hugh had not an idea, and saved his breath and energies for the final climb. In another few moments they were out of the underground stream bed, but not entirely above the earth. Once again they stared in stupefied astonishment, first at their surroundings, and then back at each other. They were standing on a ledge in a niche or recess of the wall of a round, open well. The water lapped over their feet a little, running down in the gentle trickle through the drain which they had been climbing. The back of the recess in which they were standing was the opening for the overflow. At their feet the well water stood, reaching down deep in the still. When the well was fuller, water would rush through the back of the recess, perhaps filling it, then down the drain to the well below ground, whence the overflow would tumble through the broken wall, over the floor of that curious man-made cave, and down its own naturally made bed, past the wall of the treasure chamber, and finally lose itself in the deep crevice beside it. So much for the story of the stream, which was perfectly evident. But the boys at that moment were wondering how they were ever going to climb up the smooth inside surface of that well wall in the niche of which they stood, and get to level surface ground again. "Think we can make it?" asked Dickon, looking uneasily at Hugh. "We could go back the way we came, of course," he continued, as the other hesitated. "It seems as if we had come miles and miles," Hugh admitted, with a weary sigh. "If you could stand on my shoulders, maybe you could reach the top and pull yourself over." "Then how would you get out?" "I wouldn't like for either of us to fall into the water. It looks plenty deep," cautioned Dickon, looking down into it. "And how red it is," said Hugh. "Looks almost like blood." They peered down into the silent depths, then up again at the blue sky above them. Dickon suddenly began to laugh. "Here we stand between heaven and earth," he said, "and what have we got for our pains? Not a sign of a place where any treasure could be hid did I see." "Nor I," admitted Hugh, "and what is more, we haven't got what we came in for. You know we planned to take a lot of those parchment sheets in the chest away with us to study more carefully, and they are still in the chest. Looks like we can't get up to heaven, whether we want to or not, so we might as well go back into the earth and fetch them." Without another word they began to retrace their way down the long, wet, slippery drain into the cave of the broken well. It did not seem so long or hard returning as it had coming up, and the strange underground room with its semicircular, low-walled well gave them almost a feeling of familiarity as they came out into it again. "There is just no place here where anything could be hidden, is there?" said Hugh, pausing a moment to rest and look about again. "If this was ever a secret vault for treasure like that other room, my room," said Dickon decidedly. "The treasure is certainly all gone now. What I want to know is why is this here at all? Whatever could have been the use of it, and, once again, how on earth could anybody bigger than us have got in or got out of here?" "It's all part of the same mystery, I'm sure it is," said Hugh impressively, "and some day we'll find the clue that makes everything fit together, the lost grail and the broken book, the sword, and all this." He waved his hand expressively, indicating the whole underground warren. "But now I want to get hold of those pages. Maybe we'll find the solution to the whole thing right here." They were silent again as they made their way into the cramped stream bed that took them back to the little natural cave flanked by the wall of the treasure chamber Dickon thought of as his own. When they got to the more open part, they stood upright with relief, stretching their aching arms and legs. Their second candle, which Dickon had managed to light again before they started back through the drain, was burning down all too fast. He looked at it uneasily, and was just about to comment on it when a sound broke the underground stillness and fairly froze the words on his lips. It was a curious sound, a little like the drone of a gigantic bee, a humming, deep and throaty, then thin or muffled, and again rising until the echoes and reverberations rolled and thundered in the narrow confinement of the cave walls. The two boys listened with hearts hammering in their throats. Dickon crushed out his candle. A dim light issued from the hole in the wall beneath which they were standing. Someone was in that treasure chamber, singing. For the hum had changed abruptly to a sort of chant in a man's voice, rich and full and clear. Hugh put a meaningful hand on Dickon's arm and started to climb the wall as quietly as possible. Dickon followed, and the two managed to find sufficient footing to stand, clinging with their hands also, where they could peer through the hole in the room. A man stood in the center of it, a man so large that he seemed almost to fill it. His head nearly touched the low ceiling, and the sound of his voice made the very walls tremble, as if it were seeking to push them out and to get more space. He had sparse white hair and a scraggly white beard, and he was dressed in a long, flowing, dirty white garment, girdled with a rope from which hung an old metal bell. Beside him, on the floor, stood a stone lantern or cresset, which gave forth a dim, uncertain light, and cast the shadow of his huge person upon the opposite wall, magnified and contorted and wavering. He stopped singing, and the bell jangled as he moved across the floor toward the chest whereon the black sword still lay. Grasping the blade near the hilt, he held the heavy weapon high, hilt up so that it looked like a cross. Then he kissed it very reverently and laid it back, handling its great weight as easily as if it had been a child's toy. and as he replaced it on the chest, he began to chant again, low at first and rhythmically, like devotional intoning. Then his voice rose into a song as wild and triumphant as a pagan paean. The words were unintelligible, partly because of the reverberation in the close-walled space, but even after the voice became lower again, they had a strange, outlandish sound. Dickon was too terrified to know whether they were Latin, English, or mere gibberish, but Hugh, whose mind had been trained in the study of other languages, realized at least that they were words, though in a different tongue from any he had ever heard before. The singing stopped again, as suddenly as before. The old man turned to another chest. He muttered to himself, and the bell at his waist clanged as he opened the lid and bent over it. Slowly he drew out the jeweled altar. Dickon's fear gave place for the moment to indignation, and an angry exclamation almost escaped his lips, but he choked it back, his eyes still fastened on the huge figure in the room. He had taken the altar out, and now placed it carefully upon the chest beside the sword. Then he studied it minutely, and in silence. Not a sound broke the underground stillness, save the faint trickle of the stream running across the floor of the cave beneath the boys. It was at that moment that Hugh's strength gave out. He had been clinging with both hands to a rough protruding stone in the wall, easing thereby the weight on his lame foot, which rested on an insecure foothold. His other leg and foot ached with the strain, and his fingers were growing numb, or perhaps the stone to which he was clinging slipped a little. However it was, he suddenly lost his grip and fell down onto the floor of the cave with a heavy thud and the clattering of loose rubble after him. The man in the secret room gave a startled cry, then a shout. "Who goes there? Who goes there?" Only echoes, and then silence answered. Dickon had climbed quickly and quietly down to where Hugh was lying. They crouched there in the darkness, neither answering the cry nor daring to move. Suddenly the light issuing from the aperture above them vanished. There was a rasping sound as of rusty, creaking iron, then stillness and dark. "Art thou hurt, Hugh?" Dickon whispered huskily, his ears still listening as acutely for any further sound that might come from the treasure chamber as for the boy's reply. Hugh could not be hurt, he just could not, or however would they get out of this place? "Nay," Hugh whispered back stoutly, "not much anyway. I just couldn't hold on any longer. What has happened, think you? Has he put out his light, and is he waiting for us in the dark? Or has he gone down the passageway with it?" "He can't have got out if he has done that," declared Dickon positively. Again they both listened, scarcely breathing, not a sound. "Climb up and look through the hole again," whispered Hugh. "Here, I will get the candle lit." In a moment Dickon, grasping the light, had climbed the wall and peered into the treasure room. It was empty. "Now what shall we do?" said he, returning to Hugh. You aren't hurt too much to go back to the well." The boy pulled himself shakily up. He was bruised and sore, and his lame leg was aching painfully, but he squared his shoulders and set his lips. "I can get along all right," said he. "But Dickon, I could not get out of that well. We neither of us could, without help. We'll have to go back into the treasure room and out through the passage to the moor, even if we meet that queer giant of a man inside of it." Dickon said nothing for a moment, and Hugh continued. "There is really no reason to be afraid of him, is there? He looks like a hermit, and this place doesn't belong to him any more than to us, so why should he mind our being here?" "Surely it's the main highway from Glaston to the sea," said Dickon sarcastically. "Why shouldn't one meet all one's friends in the world and his wife too?" The thought of his secret being in the possession of uninvited others still rankled in the boy's heart. "Anyway, I think he is mad," he continued after a pause. "Nobody who was sane would go on the way he did, chanting and all, down here in this queer place. It isn't natural." Hugh could not but agree with him, however. There was nothing one could do about it. "Come on," said he, starting slowly and painfully to climb the wall to the hole. "We've got to go this way anyhow." Dickon followed close upon his heels, holding the candle which was fast diminishing. Once in the room they looked about more carefully. The sword was still on the chest, the sapphire altar beside it. Evidently the man had left in too much haste to replace the latter. With hearts beating more fearfully than either cared to admit, the two approached the arched entrance to the passageway and looked into it as far as the light from the candle would penetrate. No one was there. They moved quietly, with every turn of the underground way that held their breath, expecting surely to see the large form of the mysterious stranger filling the cramped space, turning on them, possibly in a rage of anger or insanity. He must be without a light himself, for no competing glimmer shone ahead of their own candle. Slowly, cautiously, they advanced, saying no word, breathing deep with relief as each further turn of the passage opened up and showed itself empty. At last they reached the cleft in the moor, extinguished their light, and scrambled out. Hugh threw himself on the ground, panting a little, as much from exhaustion as relief. Dickon's round eyes were fairly bulging. "He isn't human," said he. "There just isn't any way for him to have got out. He must be fey, or a devil in the form of a man, and have just vanished like a puff of smoke." Hugh laughed. "Not that man," said he reassuringly. "He was as much flesh and blood as you or I, and there was too much of him to vanish." "But a devil could take any form," argued Dickon, "and I tell you there is not any way a man could have got out." "Well, he just didn't look like a devil, or anything but an old man. There must be some other way. Let's go in again, as soon as we are both free, and find out." Dickon crossed himself. Somehow the action seemed to give him more courage. "We will do that, brother," said he. Hugh got up, and they started back in the direction of the abbey. "I guess we don't have to wait to be errant knights to find adventure," said Hugh. "We are right in the middle of one now." "I told you anything could happen in our Glaston," declared the other.